Coming up in This Week in Computer Hardware, Intel 750 SSD is stupid fast, going deep on G-Sync and FreeSync, Chromebit, new NVIDIA Shield, and OnLive is going down. All this and more. It's all coming up next on Twitch.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiCH.
Bandwidth for Twitch is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
It's time for TWiC's annual audience survey, and we want to hear from you. Please visit twit.tv/survey and let us know what you think. It only takes a few minutes, and your anonymous feedback will help us make TWiT even better. We thank you so much for your continued support. twit.tv/survey.
This is Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, episode 309, recorded 4/2/2015. One smoking fast SSD.
This episode of This Week in Computer Hardware is brought to you by iFixit. You can fix it, and iFixit makes it easy with free step-by-step repair guides, high-quality replacement parts, and all the tools you'll need. For $10 off your purchase of $50 or more, go to ifixit.com/twit and enter the code TWiCH at checkout.
Welcome to Twitch, This Week in Computer Hardware, Twit's weekly show that aims to bring you the most useful, most informative, and apparently fastest PC hardware news on the planet. We love mobiles, we love phones, and occasionally, ladies and gentlemen, Ryan, my partner in crime, even loves the watches. Mr. Shrout, are you currently wearing your Moto 360?
Yes.
What time is it, sir?
It is apparently 9:17 or something to that effect. And I got a Twitter message that you and I are going to be on the show starting a little bit ago. So everything seems to be working correctly.
I feel like sending you notifications over and over again during the podcast, just so we can prove the utility of the smartwatch. I mock, but there's a really interesting article, if a little breathy, and full of giant pictures, called The Secret History of the Apple Watch, up on Wired.com. We'll put a link to the show notes on that. But it is an interesting story, a saga, if you will. Not nearly, though, as interesting as I saw a benchmark yesterday that had Mr. Malventano weeping with amusement and horror and joy. It's the Intel SSD 750 series, 1.2 terabyte PCI Express and 2.5-inch SFF review. This thing is insane. I don't know how else to say it, but when you look at the benchmarks on Intel's new SSD, oh my goodness. I mean, essentially they're taking the enterprise technology, they're squeaking it down to something that's a little more affordable for consumers. Yeah, HHHL, PCI Express, X4 form factor, as well as a 2.5-inch SFF 8639 packaging. The 2.5-inch model contains the exact same set of components, just rearranged into a smaller device. And it looks like a SATA device, but it's not. And I don't know if you can scroll up on the first page.
I've got one of them here, actually.
Oh, cool.
I've got ours on the desk. So this is the one you're talking about.
Yeah.
So this is probably the one that will be much more common for consumers that want to buy these. This is like the PCI Express add-in card. You see you've got a buy 4 PCI Express connection down here, and then it just looks like a normal kind of add-in card, but it's not a video card, it's an SSD. So it's a PCI Express based device. This is actually a 1.2 terabyte model.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the largest that they're selling right now. This is literally the exact same components, the same controller, the same flash, the same configuration of chips and die, but it's in a form factor that's a little bit more familiar. Now, it's a 2.5-inch drive, but it's a little bit thicker than what you're used to probably. And it uses a connector that is called, oh man, I'm going to screw this up, 6639, I believe, is what it is. And the connector itself, 8639 is the style of connector. But it kind of looks like a SATA connector. It kind of looks like a SAS connector. It's actually identical to a SAS connector, but there's extra pins along the top. So it looks the same, but this actually creates a full PCI Express connection to a device. Now, obviously, you look at the add-in card, you know how this installs into your case. This plugs into a PCI Express slot on your motherboard. Kind of makes sense. This one is a bit more complicated because what you have here is you get a cable like this that plugs into the device like so, and get it upside down there, plugs in like that, and you have this other connection on the end, which is typically, it's hard to see on this video, but it's normally used for enterprise grade. Yeah, there you go. It's a good shot of it. An enterprise grade multi-SAS connection, like a breakout cable, if you will. Now, you might say, hey, well, my motherboard doesn't have anything on there like that. And you are 100% correct, more than likely, unless you're using enterprise grade stuff. So that thing next to it, which is what this is something that Intel is helping motherboard companies develop and integrate into boards. This is the first one we got in from ASUS. This is called the Hyper Kit. And what you're looking at is essentially a M.2 bridge for this connector. So you plug this into the M.2 slot on a motherboard that has PCI Express connectivity on it, and then you plug that cable in to that connector right there, and then you connect that up to the SSD, and boom, you have a PCI Express connected device that is not connected through a physical PCI Express slot, but instead through this manner. Now, that particular module is only right now shipping with one motherboard that just was released, the X99 Sabertooth, which is a very high-end board, very expensive motherboard. But Intel seems to think that more vendors are going to implement that type of technology, or maybe start to integrate that connector onto motherboards themselves in order to take advantage of this form factor. So we'll see if that actually turns out to be the case. I think at least for the rest of this year, by far the most important is going to be this add-in card variant. You mentioned performance, and it's like kind of insane. Sequential read speeds of like 2.5 to 2.6 gigabytes per second.
Right.
Sequential write speeds of 1.3, 1.4, 1.5 gigabytes per second as well.
It's pretty crazy. Like, I don't know, Zach, if you can maybe jump to the third page first, the random performance, because that's the particularly cruel one. When you're looking at the benchmarks versus some of the other products there. The IO meter, IOPS. This is an interesting tool for measuring, but this is crazy. So
yeah, that graph that he's showing there, the top fluorescent white looking thing is the result of the 750, the Intel SSD 750 part. And I will note the performance is identical between both form factors, so that's why there's only one result in here. The next highest one down there, the next two, like there's kind of like a light blue and then a red. Those are both PCI Express based SSDs as well. And you can see there's kind of like a dark blue that's just under the red. That's actually a pair of 850 EVOs in RAID 0 as well. And you can kind of go down the line and you can see there. Now, what's important to note is that the Intel 750 SSD is not just PCI Express, it's NVMe, which is non-volatile memory express, which is a new standard for PCI Express based technology that gets rid of the whole AHCI overhead issues that we've had before. So it's not really bottlenecked by AHCI, which all the other PCI Express drives you see in that graph are using PCI Express, but through the AHCI interface, right? Like it communicates through the rest of the system as if it were connected to a SATA controller of sorts. It just has a little bit more bandwidth given to it. But clearly, NVMe offers a lot in terms of reducing overhead, in terms of improving your IOPS, right? So it's multi-threaded capable. It's able to take advantage of multiple CPU cores to increase that. And you can see where we kind of top off there, just over 200 IOPS, maybe 210,000 operations per second. We actually hit a limit of what the previous testbed's processor could handle with single workload. So a revised version that Alan is kind of messing around with will increase the worker count there, and we should actually see it scale even higher than that. So clearly, in kind of its own class, performance wise, compared to the rest of these parts on here. I mean, you look at that green line that is the Intel SSD 730 kind of towards the bottom, and you just realize like that was like a super fast SSD not too long ago. I mean, it still is a super fast SSD. It's just like this is it's a totally different animal.
Right.
And we saw an NVMe SSD about this time last year. It was the enterprise branded Intel P3700 SSD, and performance on these two is very similar. They're using the same controller, using the same flash, same implementation. But now they've got it down to a consumer grade price point. It's not cheap, right? But I think it's going to be less expensive than most people are going to, I guess, expect.
Sure.
The 400 gig version of this will sell for $389, so 97 cents a gig. It's fairly high up there. 1.2 terabyte version sells for $1,029, which is 86 cents per gig. So $1,000 for an SSD is a lot of money to spend on a storage device.
Right.
But in terms of cost per gig, it's maybe 10, 15 cents per gig more than, say, the 850 Pro, right? So you're paying a premium, but not an exorbitant premium, I think.
Right.
The one downside to this is they didn't release an 800 gig model, which I find very confusing, right? They did a 400 and a 1.2.
That was driving Alan nuts. I mean, that really, really, really is irritating them. They don't have an 800 gigabyte version.
Yeah, it's 400 gigs is kind of small. It's not small in capacity, but if you're gonna want the very best part, which is what you have to want if you're gonna buy an SSD like this, then you probably want it to be your only drive, or at least you don't have to worry about moving things on and off of it. 1.2 terabytes was fantastic, but it's a lot of money. If you could get an 800 gig for like $700, right? You know, you're in the same realm as a super high-end graphics card, and now you can say, well, you know what, I'm going to get more of an advantage out of upgrading to one of these than I am by adding another, you know, GTX 980 or whatever it happens to be. And I think you can make that argument much more easily than I'm going to spend $1,000 on an add-in PCI Express card. So hopefully, you know, we did a live stream with the Intel guys today during the launch, and we kind of pestered them about that lack of an 800 gig. They seemed very receptive to the idea. They said they got a ton of feedback from various people on their reviews that should be the case. So they are heavily considering it. I don't know how long that design cycle and release cycle will take, but it sounds like they may think about releasing one of those, which is kind of aggravating, because had they just asked us like a couple of months ago, hey, we're going to do a 400 1.2. It's like, yeah, you should probably do an 800. We would have given the exact same feedback without ever having tested the device. So there's that. And the only other final point that we want to make sure people know about this, because it's NVMe, because it's that new interface standard, compatibility is going to be it's more tough to get, right? Intel is only officially supporting X99 and Z97 motherboards. So if you have an X79 platform or Z87 platform, they don't officially support it. I think it will work in most cases, but the problem is, like, they want you to be able to plug this in, have this be your only storage device, have Windows installer see it, install Windows to it, boom, done, and go about your day. And Windows 8.1, for example, builds in the driver for it, but your BIOS has to have support for it too. Your UEFI has to be updated in a way that it recognizes the NVMe device, it recognizes it as a bootable device, and then it's a primary storage controller. And so, you know, I think Gigabyte put out a press release that the vast majority of their motherboards have been updated to support the NVMe drives. I know ASUS, we did all of our testing on ASUS motherboards, so we know that their BIOSes, if you have the most recent one in the last 2 weeks or so, are updated to support NVMe. So we're gonna do a story, we're gonna do a video on just kind of like installing the operating system to it, because that's something that current PCI Express SSDs you haven't really been able to do. You've kind of had to either load a driver at the base level or install to an OS, and then, you know, install it after the fact, which, you know, kind of defeats the purpose in a lot of ways. So we really like this device. Alan really liked it. I really liked it. I'm looking forward to, like, I want to get one of these in for our editing test bed. If you do, like, a lot of questions we got during the stream were like, what do you do with 2.5 gigabytes per second of bandwidth? And it's a very fair question, because there's not a whole lot of people that need that.
And that's one of the things I wanted to point out is this is ridiculously fast. But if you are running an 840 or an 850 Samsung or any of a laundry list of other drives out there, unless you are doing massive files on video editing, massive files on audio editing, crazy stuff in Photoshop, you don't need to spend $750 for a drive. By all means, go out and do it, drive the economy. But there are very few people that can actually justify the expense for this from a performance standpoint. If it thrills you to say, like, I have the fastest I/O on the block with the lowest CPU overhead, go for it.
Yeah. It's interesting. Like, if you're the type of guy, it's surprising to me how many times we get this question. Is like, I'm running multiple VMs. This is going to be something that's going to be able to handle that, unlike anything else. If you're doing like 4K video editing, and you have large 4K files that you're scrubbing across and you want to browse through, right? It's not really going to improve your rendering speed drastically because your processor is still going to be the bottleneck there. But in terms of loading up a file, you don't have to worry about having enough memory to store the whole thing, because this is bridging that gap between a SSD and like a mem cache, or like a mem drive, I guess. So you scrub through those, it'll be super easy. You won't lose anything in that regard. There are some instances where that's important, or where it will be useful. Clearly, not everybody. Like, will you load up your game a little bit faster? Maybe. Will you notice it? Probably not. So, yeah, I mean, I think, if you have a really good SSD today, I don't think there's really a need to go out and upgrade necessarily. But if you don't have an SSD and you say, well, I want the best one out there, and you can pay a little bit more on cost per gig than what the other drives are out there selling at, then the Intel 750 is that cream of the crop. It is the best you can get, for sure.
That about wraps it up. I mean, it's a phenomenal piece of engineering. In 2 years, we'll all be using it, or similar products that cost a quarter as much. But it was interesting. Like, Alan gets excited. Alan doesn't get this excited that often. It was fun to watch that. Samsung 850 Evo M.2 SATA and M SATA 120 gigabyte, 500 gigabyte, 1 terabyte SSD Roundup. Again, by Alan Malventano, up on PCPer.com. Following the same pattern that Samsung led with the 840 Pro and 840 Evo, history has repeated itself with the 850 Pro and 850 Evo. The 850 Evo launching late last year and being quite successful, it was only a matter of time before Samsung expanded past the 2.5-inch form factor of this popular SSD, and today, that being March 31st, was that day. I'm kind of excited about this because I really want to upgrade the hard drive in my laptop. It's just nice to have options, especially ones that drive down the price of existing options. So the M.2 units in this roundup are using SATA controllers. The 850 Evos use VNAND, quote, a vastly different technology than the planar NAND used in the 840 Evo. They expect, or Alan expects, that it does not have the same flash cell drift related issues in the 840 Evo. But so far they haven't seen any of those slowdown issues in the 850. TLC flash for storage and SLC caching portion to hold on to the data as it comes in. Like, what else would you do with cache? But performance looked pretty good.
Pretty much matched what the 2.5-inch drives were, which is, I mean, it's not amazing, but it's good, right? That's kind of what we expected.
Right. M.2, M SATA, 120 gigabytes, 500 gigabytes, 120 gigabytes, 256 gigabytes, 500 gigabytes, pretty identical on the average read. The writes change a lot. That's where it's kind of interesting. We look at the M.2 and the M SATA on the 120 gigabytes versus the writes on the 500 gigabyte and 1 terabyte, which utterly spank. And I'm assuming that's just because the amount of memory chips they're writing to in parallel on the 500.
Yeah, because if you look at the 850 Evo 120 gig, so if you look at the same capacity at the 2.5-inch form factor, it has the same lower writes speed as well. So it's more of an issue of how many dies are on the package, or how many dies are on the SSD that it can address. So the 120 gig is definitely lower than the other capacities, but it's consistently lower with the rest of the 850 Evo family. So
this is good. It's interesting that the HD tune numbers, which are pretty much identical across the slate of the Samsung products. File copy test creation, performance looks solid. Yeah, it's interesting. It's always funny how the capacity can so much more dramatically impact performance than almost any other factor when you're looking at some of this stuff. Let me guess. This gets, ladies and gentlemen, dun dun dun, the editor's choice for PC Perspective. High-end performance and endurance combined with TLC pricing. These are my default recommendation for MSATA and M.2 SATA applications. It's not too bad. It's funny, like 67 cents a gigabyte for the 120 gigabyte version, scaling up to 46 and 45 cents per gigabyte for the 500 gigabyte and 1 terabyte versions on the M-SATA, and very similar price scaling on the M.2 SATA.
Right.
So,
now we had the question come up during our live stream earlier today about the Intel SSD 750. Like, we have this M.2 card add-on for it. So does that mean that there may be a M.2 variant of the SSD 750 coming out? And the answer is no. Like, there's not going to be a version of this. Like, it's a fairly big controller. Like, you won't be able to tell here, but if you look on the PCB, the controller itself is quite large physically. It uses quite a bit of power. Like this, the maximum TDP it will hit when you're doing like pushing 4K random writes to it, which is the most intense workload for the controller. You're going to draw as much as like 20 to 25 watts on this buddy. Read speeds, read performance, you're going to max out about 14 watts. Now, that's not a big deal on a desktop system, which is where this is going to go, but on a mobile system, a laptop or something, 14 watts is a lot. So you know, we'll probably see a different Intel controller eventually making its way onto M.2 PCIe drives. Not this controller. It'll probably be a little bit lower performance in order to kind of keep the power down. It'll probably be built on a different process technology in order to make it smaller so you can fit more NAND chips and die on the M.2 module itself. So these are still kind of the question we got was, oh, hey, you just reviewed some M.2, but now these are going to be better M.2s, and these aren't going to be M.2s in any time soon. So it's not something to really hold you back, I guess.
It's good to not be held back. I mean, I don't know. Yeah. Trying to figure out something snappy and witty to move on to. And I'm just going to say, you know what? Let's talk about the G-Sync and FreeSync, how the technologies differ. Or more accurately, Ryan's going to talk about G-Sync and FreeSync. It's been interesting because, you know, we kind of sort of saw the beginnings of this. It arrives, the FreeSync monitors arrives, there's pain, there's trauma, there's suffering, there's joy. You know, and you're finally, it feels like you're finally getting the chance to really sink in deep and kind of look at the sort of underlying differences in the choices made.
Yeah. It was an interesting launch. So when FreeSync first launched, I was kind of out of town. We didn't have a whole lot of time to do big in-depth reviews. But the kind of experiences that I wrote about initially were basically summed up into 3 parts. Inside the variable refresh window of any particular FreeSync monitor, the experience perfectly matched what you got with the G-Sync monitor. It was good. No tearing, no stutter. As long as you were inside that window, it was great. When you went above the window, the FreeSync monitor was actually a little bit better because it offered you the option of keeping VSync on or disabling VSync, depending on what your preference was. The NVIDIA solution basically caps you with VSync on. It doesn't allow you to disable it. Below the variable refresh window, so you know, below 40 frames per second, for example, on the FreeSync BenQ monitor that we have in, the experience was very different. G-Sync actually acts like a variable refresh monitor well below what the minimum refresh rate of the display itself is. And it does that by doing something called frame doubling, where when it drops below a certain frame rate and it says, oh, we can't really go any lower than this because you're going to see flickering on the screen, it doubles the refresh rate and then doubles what the frames are being drawn at. So it basically kind of duplicates a frame in an even interval, so you don't see stutter, but you also don't see tearing on the display. Now, FreeSync doesn't have that capability. When you go below, say, 40 frames per second, you again get the VSync on or VSync off option, and you know, maybe fundamentally that's not a big concern, but the problem is that the refresh rate stays at that low window. It stays at 40 hertz. And the frame rate, if your frame rate's now like at 35 frames per second, that's any effects you saw with tearing or any effects you see with judder and stutter will be amplified because your refresh rate is low. It's kind of like the experience of if you've ever used one of the first 4K TVs that had a 30 hertz refresh rate, and any tearing you saw or stutter you saw in the game was amplified because you're seeing twice as many tears or twice as many stutters because the frame rate was updating at half of what you were used to. You know, if you're used to 60 hertz. So because it stays at 40 hertz, which is not as bad as 30, but still it's fairly low, you get this kind of worse than it should be pattern of things. And so you don't get the benefit of this kind of what you can see in that graph there, the dashed line that kind of represents the effective variable refresh rate that G-Sync continues to have all the way down, thanks to its kind of algorithmic implementation of frame doubling. But the FreeSync does not. So you kind of, even as your frame rate, you know, the bottom axis there is game frame rate output. So even if your frame rate's 20, your refresh rate's going to be 40, so you have to deal with that. If your frame rate's 30, your refresh rate's still 40, so you have to deal with that. So what we did is, and I think Alan and I put this together in a video that's very effective. It's very it's fairly long, but I think we explain things very well. We got an analog oscilloscope out. We used a light sensor on a monitor. We demonstrated exactly that these things are happening because it's not anything NVIDIA's ever talked about. It's not anything AMD's ever talked about because they don't. NVIDIA doesn't want us to tell AMD how to fix it, and AMD doesn't want us to show everybody how it's broken. So we kind of said, well, we're just going to have to do this on our own. And we show you that it's happening, and you can see like on the oscilloscope how the frames double and the waves change and all that stuff. And it's not something you could really show in pictures and demonstrate very well. So we did it in a video, but I think it's very well done in terms of demonstrating the current state of things. And what's important to note is it's not a fault. It's not a fundamental fault of any particular monitor, although particular monitors in FreeSync can accentuate it. Right. If you have that, there's a 2560 by 1080 LG monitor that has a very narrow refresh rate, variable refresh rate window of 48 to 75. So as soon as you drop below 48, you have the same issue where, you know, if your game is running at 42 frames per second, your refresh rate is going to stay at 48. And that's very, you know, in terms of rate match problems, very complicated for the monitor. So you're going to see either a lot of tearing if you have VSync off, or you're going to see a dramatic amount of stutter if VSync is on. So I think
okay.
Go ahead.
So on some level, it almost sounds as if both technologies are broken. ... Or is it more an issue that you really need enough GPU to feed your monitor at a high frame rate to really take advantage of both these technologies?
I don't think. I think G-Sync is doing the right thing. They're basically saying when your game frame rate is below the minimum variable refresh of the monitor, they have figured out a way to fix it. Right? They've done a way to. They figured out an algorithm to double frames and double refresh rates so that you don't see flickering and you don't see tearing and you don't see stutter. They've basically solved that problem on the way down to lower game frame rates. But it does, and according to NVIDIA, it requires logic on the monitor side, which goes back to the whole G-Sync module versus FreeSync not having a module requirement. FreeSync, it's a fundamental issue with how FreeSync is implemented today. I believe they can fix it in drivers if they're smart enough and they choose to spend the resources and development time. Like, there's no reason what NVIDIA is doing on the module should be, you know, impossible to do in the driver, right? Where it can recognize what frame rate you're at, it knows what the variable refresh rate minimum is on a monitor, and it can kind of do the doubling on its own. It's probably not easy. I'm not a software developer for drivers. I don't know, but as a guy from the outside, knowing what I know about how this stuff works, it should be able to be implemented. It's just a matter of if AMD is going to spend the time and resources to do it, or if they believe that the experience below that minimum refresh rate is not as drastic of an issue as we believe it is today and going forward. So It's a very complicated topic. I know I can't explain it very well in kind of the short segment we have here, but if you go to PCPro.com and you watch this video, the story is called Dissecting G-Sync and FreeSync with Science, right? So if we put the word with science in there, so
and engineering.
yeah. So I think it gets explained very well, and we did our best to be very agnostic about it because we think FreeSync is better on the high end, we think G-Sync is better on the low end, and in the middle, they're both fine. So you guys, make your own decision on what the importance of that low side is versus that high side.
There you have it.
Yeah. I
don't know. It's interesting. 28 nanometer GPUs will continue for a while. Not to grossly oversimplify, Josh Walrath wrote this up on PC Per. Quote, "We have been very spoiled throughout the years. We likely did not realize exactly how spoiled we were until it became very obvious that the rate of process technology advances hit a virtual brick wall." And what Josh is pointing out is 28 nanometer just keeps going on. For at least for everybody, it seems like for everybody but Intel. Intel's been managed to continue to shrink process technology down through 14 nanometer. A little hiccup getting to 14 nanometer, which is leading to a shortened product cycle probably for Broadwell. But in theory, planar transistors were supposed to take the place of the current technology and accelerate the migration from 28 nanometer to 20 nanometer products. And that just hasn't really worked out, I think, is kind of the summary on that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. The simple version is it didn't work out the way people were hoping. It's not a process tech that's really shown to be advantageous for large power-hungry chips.
Right.
It seems to work okay for GPUs, smaller. Yeah.
I mean, GPUs essentially going to require FinFETs, which are going to be more expensive to get to the 20 nanometer process because of the ridiculous amount of power they continue to draw. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because 20 nanometers is being used, right? Apple's using it. Samsung is not using it. Who else is using the 20 nanometer? Oh, NVIDIA is using it for their Tegra parts, right? So for SoCs, smaller chips, lower power parts, it seems to have some advantages. But clearly, if there was any way to make 20 nanometer work effectively, either to save money or to save power or to increase performance, NVIDIA or AMD would have done this on GPUs, and all indications are that's not the case. They're using 28 again, which is not what they would want to do ideally. So expect a jump from 28 down to those FinFETs sometime in 2016, maybe? Maybe?
Well, the nice thing about GPUs, at least in desktop environments, is they've got a fair amount of real estate to work with.
That's true.
I don't know. And billions of transistors. Billions and billions of transistors.
Yeah.
I have personally broken billions and billions of screens, and without the help of our friends at iFixit.com/twit, enter in the offer code TWiCH, I probably would still have a shattered screen, weeping quietly and filling the faces of my children with glass every time they use my phone. If you're not familiar with iFixit, you must be new to this week in computer hardware. It is the free online repair manual for everything. They have more than 10,000 repair guides for everything from electronics like your smartphone and tablet and game console to your home appliances, clothing, even your bike. I got to go down to iFixit's world headquarters recently, and it was really amazing because they just dropped a couple thousand, I think, new repair guides. They're working with college students that are interested in writing and technology and learning how to communicate about technology, and they're doing some amazing stuff like adding a metric ton of Android devices to their database. They're not just about electronics, although that's obviously a big core of what they do. They have foolproof instructions to fix all your stuff. Red ring of death on your Xbox, swap the battery on your Galaxy X5. They've got help fixing your bike. But if you stick to the electronics, iFixit has you covered with parts, tools, and, of course, the repair guides. iFixit also makes the most trusted repair tools for consumer electronics, including the Pro Tech Toolkit, which has over 70 tools to assist you with any mod, malfunction, or misfortune that comes your way. It comes in a slick little tool roll. In fact, if I reach right over the top of my desk, you'll see it right here. And there's something missing out of the center of this tool roll, which is iFixit's 54. Well, there's the tool roll, which is much more interesting than my face, right? So 70 tools inside of here: spudgers, pins, tweezers, knives, mayhem, measuring tools. But we want to tell you about the 54-bit driver kit. Standard, specialty, and security bits, Philips bits, these can't say that on a family podcast, pentalobe bits that are used in iPhones and Mac laptops. Which are just a sack of irritation when you get right down to them. You know, I can sit and look at security bits all day long. Look at that, kids. Because I am that kind of nerd. But right there, three different pentalobe bits for all of your iPhone, iPad, and Mac needs. Torx bits, the tri-wing bits for video game consoles, the legendary triangle bit for McDonald's toys. You know, the quality is excellent, and it's kind of funny. A lot of people don't realize that the hole on the top of the precision driver inside the iFixit toolkit, you could put a lanyard on it should you be worried about losing it, but it really works particularly well when you do shove down on the screw and turn it to torque it around with a piece of metal or another screwdriver. These are really nice. The swivel top precision driver is really, really clean. They've got a flex extension for like when you're trying to dig inside of a stereo component. It's kind of the classic one for me where you're here and the front's here and you can swing this over here and rotate around obstacles. It's just cool. Precision tweezers to get things, to little tiny parts out of little tiny corners. I mentioned spudgers, nylon spudgers, metal spudgers, plastic opening tools, because sometimes you got to crack things open to make them better. You could spend years, which I pretty much did, assembling a toolkit like this. Or, ladies and gentlemen, for $64.95, you can have the entire collection of tools and the fantastic roll and a lifetime warranty. And you can, I laugh because they're like hobbyists and home DIY fixers also use Protect Toolkit for doorknobs, eyeglasses, cabinet doors, sink fixtures, and more. I like to add toilets to that list, carburetors, adjusting the screw that controls the boost level on the diesel engine or the turbocharger on the diesel engine on my truck. There's a lot of good stuff you can do with these. It's a nice set of tools for a nice price in a nice package. And like we mentioned before, there are thousands of free iFixit guides to help you put your tools to use. Do yourself a favor. Start fixing stuff if you aren't already. With iFixit, you can fix it yourself. Visit iFixit.com/twit for more than 10,000 free step-by-step guides. iFixit also sells every part and tool you'll need. Enter in the code TWiCH, that's TWiCH at checkout. You'll be supporting the podcast, and you'll save $10 off any purchase of $50 or more. That's iFixit.com/twit. Use the code TWiCH, TWiCH, to save $10 on your purchase of $50 or more. And like I mentioned, support the podcast so we can keep the podcast coming to you. Toilets, man. It's all about repairing the toilets. They'll mock your toolkit until you fix the tap on that keg on Friday night.
True. That's a good point. Yeah.
Everybody mocks the toolkit until they need something fixed. And then they mock no more, at least until the next time they need to mock you. That might be a sign that I need to choose new friends. There are also signs that the new NVIDIA Shield portable will be coming with the Tegra X1, which actually, so the story posted, then you posted an update to it. So you have a confirmation. Is this independent confirmation that the Shield P2523 will have the Tegra X1 system on a chip on it?
It wasn't confirmed from NVIDIA,
Okay.
but it was more confirmed from like a shipping manifest, I guess.
So this guy in LA who saw a container and the paperwork for it was able to maybe tell us about what was inside the thing on the thing.
So the first leak came from the Bluetooth and Wi-Fi certification websites where they had to submit some things. And then the second leak came from, apparently, I don't know. I find it riveting that people like comb through online shipping manifests for companies like Bangalore Air Cargo and found, data for something called Loki that lists a Tegra, what do they call it? A Tegra or a T210, which is kind of one of the names for the Tegra X1. The non-marketing, the actual engineering name was the T210. And then Loki was the code name because if you remember back to the original Shield device, its code name was Thor. So You put those together, it seems
this is its shifty, underhanded little brother.
right. Yeah. So I don't know how. I guess take that for what you will on what it will mean for the actual product release. But all signs point to there being a new Shield portable with the new processor in it. I don't know what they have to do to make the Shield portable a successful device. I don't think anyone would say that the first one
games in the toilet.
Well, yeah. I think there's a lot of people that do that, but they just use their phones, right? So what they need to do is they need to do something to prove it, that it can work.
It works. Nobody's ever questioned that it worked. If you get your hands on one, it works. It's just how many people actually can't hit pause.
Right.
So I don't know.
By works, I mean has a market, right? Has an addressable market. Right?
Well, that's an entirely different question.
Are they going to? Is this one going to have a bigger screen? Because playing PC games on a 5-inch screen is not great. But
no, it's not. But
I think having a game console that's the size of your laptop is bad too.
It's a product that exists to demonstrate the power. The awesomeness of the Tegra processor, and if it wasn't for that, I don't think it would exist.
That's true. Yeah, but I mean, they already have the Shield console. Like they just announced the console at GDC or GTC or one of those, and that way you can take advantage of like full big screen televisions that are 4K, and you can do all that kind of stuff. I just think trying to show off the power of something on a 5-inch screen becomes incredibly difficult to do. Especially if it's not something that you can convince people to carry around with them everywhere they go.
Yeah, it's not. I have to say, I've seen just about every portable gaming device that's ever been sold somewhere in mass transit in the Bay Area. I have never seen a Shield on the road.
And you would be way more likely to see it there than I would be to see it here, right? just because of the regions, right?
Right.
So I don't know. Clearly, they're going to do it.
It's cool.
You can't doubt Bangalore Air manifests.
No, certainly not I. You would also can't doubt that Google is going to turn your TV into a Chrome computer. Interesting collection of announcements from Google this week. I have a lovely picture up on the Gizmodo website of the Chromebit. So essentially, it is an HDMI stick computer. It's not the first time we've seen this. We've obviously seen this with a bunch of ARM Android-based devices. Intel, of course, announced their super duper Intel / Windowsy kind of one, which was quite possibly the most awkward sentence I've spoken in 2015. Yeah, but there's several months. There's like 9 months to go, so I could get even more awkward. But essentially, it's a Chrome OS computer for under $100. What's kind of interesting is it's using the same parts, fundamentally the same parts that are inside their new Chromebooks. So it's called a Chromebit. It's going to cost like $99. It's very similar to the Intel Compute Stick in the sense that it's HDMI. On the end of a thing looks like a giant thumb drive, maybe a wrist drive might be a better way to describe it. But where the Compute Stick from Intel is running Windows 8.1, this is running the Chrome operating system. The Rockchip RK3288 processors, which is, again, the same one that are on those two new super inexpensive Chromebooks we'll talk about in a second. It's interesting. It will turn your HDMI monitor or your HDMI-equipped HD TV, i.e. nearly all of them, into a Chromebook. 2 gigabytes of RAM, 16 gigabytes of local storage, which is generous by Google standards. They who seem to want you to have everything on the internet like everyone else right now. Right. Dual band, 802.11 AC Wi-Fi, Bluetooth 4.0. And there's that thing you're looking at right now. It's a big old fat USB 2.0 port on one end. It's not the most expensive stick out there by a long shot, but it should be really, really capable. And if you are buying into the Chrome operating system ecosystem, or you want something that kids can play with without destroying your PC, or if the kids are using the Chrome operating system at school, it should be interesting to play with and fairly inexpensive. Google's main goals for this seems to be small businesses. Gizmodo says, quote, small businesses in third world countries due to price easy manageability, and the product manager at Google was pretty adamant that there were going to be other computer companies building Chromebook dongle PC stick things. And this is not a Chromecast replacement. It's just a Chrome PC in a stick. So you're not dumping your Chromecast. You just have another option for bringing Chrome into your life. You know, should you have that need, and should you also need a new Chromebook, by the way. You know, the other big announcement this week, and I thought this was really interesting. The higher Chromebook 11, which is available right now at Amazon, the Hisense Chromebook, which is available at Walmart, $150. Pretty good battery life. It's interesting. True, Zolo, Nexian. There's a whole bunch of Chrome devices that are available. You may not be particularly familiar with a lot of these names. Higher, maybe if you've seen televisions. Hisense, probably not. You know, these are companies that are kind of building a brand in the U.S. ASUS has the Chromebook Flip, which is going to be a little more expensive. But I thought it was interesting seeing this kind of array of devices, right? So the Chromebit, the ASUS Chromebook Flip, which is essentially a convertible. So it's it's a tablet, it's a laptop, and I have another example of that from ASUS. We'll show you in a couple minutes. I'm kind of curious if did they go up for sale on Amazon and Walmart? Nothing says excitement like clicking on the Walmart website.
Click on the Walmart link.
Okay, so $150 pre-orders available for the Hisense Chromebook. 11.6-inch quad-core processor. That's the Rock chip processor we mentioned earlier. Literally, it is essentially the monitor and the keyboard are $50 because it's the Rock chip RK3288 Cortex A17 quad-core processor, 2 gigs of RAM, 16 gigabytes of local storage, and an 11.6-inch screen. It just makes me kind of laugh that apparently you get the screen and the keyboard and the larger case for $50 over the Chromebit. Yep, and pre-orders. So they are not currently shipping, but both are available for pre-order. There's a lot of good stuff going on at the low end.
There really is, yeah. Yeah,
they're claiming
these low-cost systems are looking to be very impressive.
Yeah. And they're claiming like 10 hours of battery life, and more ports than the next MacBook. 2 USB ports, an HDMI port, a headphone jack, and a micro SD slot. You mock, sir. You mock.
I do. But it's not inaccurate mocking, right? I mean,
it's fundamentally accurate and truthful mocking, which is the best kind of mocking of all. Yeah.
True.
I'm just putting it out there. In sad news, OnLive is shutting down its streaming game service, and it has sold its patents to Sony. We followed this story from the long, mad launch. It was this. I mean, this. You were all over this, dude. You were excited about this, and then it arrived, and then you were like, "I'm going back to my desktop PC now."
Well, the drama at the beginning was that a beta tester sent us their unit, and we tested it, and then lawyers came and saw us and told us to take the story down. We didn't, but that was started off a beautiful relationship we had with OnLive for a long time. So if you're asking if somebody's particularly heartbroken about seeing it shut down, I'm not the right person to ask about that. However, I don't think this was a service that had a high quantity of paid users. So this was probably what we all expected to happen at some point. You know, somebody buy it, take whatever patents they had, able to wrangle out of the inept U.S. government offices, and then, I don't know, shut them down. Sony bought them, so they already bought Gaikai. Like they've clearly figured out the streaming side of it. They wanted some patents to avoid litigation, and now OnLive is no more. Now that I don't wonder where no, I just sent that one back, didn't I? I don't know. But it's gone forever now because I haven't seen it in a while. I don't know.
Well, there you have it. So, I mean, did
you know anybody that used it? I didn't. Like,
No.
still used it today, like, or recently? No, I didn't.
No.
It's like the Shield, right? If you don't know anybody that's using it, and we should know people that are using it, then chances are it's not doing fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, we don't mean to be cruel or cold, but
No,
it was a wonderful idea whose time has come, just in radically different formats and within the network within inside of your home. You know what I mean? It was a fascinating idea that just always seemed like it was going to be just on the far side of possible.
Yep.
Comcast has announced 2 gigabit per second internet. Comcast, who mocked Google because nobody needed a gigabit to the house. Ironically, or typically, my relationship to Comcast is long and complicated. They deliver internet to my home. I pay them money, and for the most part, it's a stable relationship. It's the stuff they do in Washington that kind of ticks me off. But you know, I have a choice between using them or using inferior service from other people, which means that I help to fund their efforts to make life on the internet more complicated. But my philosophical meandering aside, essentially, they started in Atlanta, or they will be starting in Atlanta next month, basically doing 2 gigabit per second symmetrical broadband service. This is going to be fairly expensive, I would imagine. You're going to have to be near Comcast fiber network, and having, you know, to get here in the hack house to get higher speed Comcast into the building, we had to commit to, or I should say Darren had to commit to 4 lines. So right now we're running 4 bonded lines with like 120 gig down and 20 gig up, which happily tested about 150 gig down and 40 up when I was running it over Ethernet. You know, but it's funny because, you know, Comcast is like, no, gigabit, Google, silly. And now I think Comcast is watching Google just quietly wire up more and more cities and are having a panic attack, which, well, they should, because I, for one, would like to see Google bring fiber to the entire United States. And with 150 billion sitting in the bank in Ireland or sitting in the bank in New York, administered by the Google company in Ireland that sits on the profits, but that's a whole nother rant that I won't go into right now. I would really like to see Google wire the entire United States and then offer me gigabit per second so I could leave Comcast. But it's interesting. They're starting in Atlanta, and they're claiming, and this is where it gets a little crazy pants, they're going to cover as many as 18 million American homes by the end of 2015. And
I just don't believe that.
No, well, it's okay. So, yeah, the idea of you know, okay, so cover means that 18 million homes will have the opportunity to pay what's probably going to be an outrageous amount of money for consumer broadband, not commercial or business broadband, right? Because you're going to need professional grade equipment, which essentially means this is going to be a professional service. I'm guessing it's going to be, did they put the price in here? I was saying it was, somebody was quoting it at over $500 a month, which actually isn't bad.
There's no such thing as 2 gigabit networking. So you either have to do gigabit networking or 10 gigabit networking.
Right.
And trust me, we've looked at 10 gigabit stuff. It's prohibitively expensive still at this point.
Well, who knows? Maybe they picked 2 gigabit because it was twice as good as Google. What I'm much more interested in is DOCSIS 3.1, which is in big, boy, there's a sentence in here somewhere. DOCSIS 3.1, which Comcast is currently testing for certification, or it's going through the certification process, and they're going to start rolling out DOCSIS 3.1 in 2016, which means your lovely aging cable wires are going to take a gigantic kick up, like 10, like we're talking essentially gigabit to every household with Comcast cable if they get a DOCSIS 3.1 modem, and that's pretty much all of Comcast customers and any other cable company that chooses to upgrade to the equipment they need to run the next generation DOCSIS cable modems. And that's, I think, what's going to get things that'll be awesome. That's also at least a year plus out. But yeah, that's if it's a year plus out, and I'll be really curious to see what how asymmetric the uploads and downloads are, because I find myself more and more really wanting faster uploads that I am not going to get. So Razer Blade 14.
Help you there.
I know it's get out your magic ball, man. Prognosticate, Ryan. You know this stuff. You've memorized the future editions of, probably if I do DOCSIS 3.1.
I got my gigabit internet. I'm done for a while. I've
got
done
your gigabit Ethernet at work.
Yeah, that's true. I feel like I live here though too, so it's fine.
Okay, so DOCSIS 3.0, i.e. the one that's in your house right now, are capable of 1.5 gigabit per second downloads and 150 megabit per second uploads, but the new 3.1 standard pushes that to a, quote, staggering 10 gigabits per second down and 1 gigabit per second up. So it's still a 10-to-1 ratio.
I only have 250 megabits up, so that's true. I am missing out on that then.
That's a quote from geek.com that showed up at the top of a Google search, and I'd like to thank Google for providing me that information and for fighting for internet freedom in Washington. Just to be random. Razer Blade 14, which is the latest version of Razer's gaming notebook. This is the 2015 version. They've kept the M.2 SSD, 3200 by 1800 resolution. Quote, Jeremy Hallstrom, unfortunately, they stuck with the glossy panel. And as someone who has had glossy panels in his life, I understand his frustration with that. Yeah. The i7 4720HQ stays. GPU has been upgraded with a GTX 970M with 3 gigabytes of RAM. And they've doubled the RAM in the machine to 16 gigabytes, quote, at least in the model, which Kit Guru tested. The 14-inch size, Jeremy writes, keeps the weight down to 4.5 pounds. That just sounds so 1999, but also ensures that the price is high. The 512 gigabyte model is $2,700. So if you, you need a badass gaming laptop, ladies and gentlemen, Razer says, come bring your credit card, come bring your checkbook, come bring your Bitcoin. We have the laptop for you. And I got to say, I think, 14 inches is a nice compromise. I'm a little, probably less enthusiastic about it over a 17-inch laptop compared to the marketing information from Razer, but it's a nice-looking piece of hardware. Also, a nice-looking piece of hardware, which if I'd been really clever, I would have started it several minutes ago. This is the ASUS Transformerbook T300 Chi, or Chi, or Chi, probably.
Chi, yeah.
Chi. And I'm going to do something hopefully correctly. It's a convertible, kids. I really like this so far. Yeah. I'm actually, I'm probably should finish the review before I crack it open, but they suggested that you might be able to actually upgrade it. Really clean build. They were very excited about their sort of diamond cut edges on here, which is not going to come through Skype by any means necessary or otherwise. Probably not. But they're claiming about 8 hours of battery life. And it feels good in the hands, like 1.6 pounds and then 2.7 pounds with the keyboard. The keyboard's Bluetooth. It's kind of funny. There's no battery in the keyboard, which is kind of a bummer because I'd love the keyboard to deliver additional battery life. But it's Core M. It is fanless. And I'm excited to get hands-on with this. SD card for memory expansion, HDMI, USB 3.0 inside of there, and the home button, which always makes me happy.
When you put on the table with the dock attached, the keyboard attached, does it feel like it's going to tip over?
No. In fact, let me turn this over here. Watch, I'm in a warehouse. Yeah, well, sometimes you just got to go for it in the name of journalistic something or other. Somewhere around here, there's a laptop. Oh, there we go. And I'm going to keep my hand down here in case I'm entirely too clever. So I had to whack that fairly hard.
Is that as far back as the screen goes?
Yes.
Okay.
But you can also, you can operate it in the...
Gotcha.
Okay. Yes. Okay.
Ta-da!
So, ta-da! I don't know. It's been a while since I've played around with a 2-in-1 with a convertible. So the Core M performance seems pretty good so far as I fling the keyboard off. Yeah.
Don't drop it.
It's really embarrassing to break the product before the review.
They might want it back. Yeah.
They probably will want it back. Price is going to be $700, I believe. I will have more information on battery life and performance next week. And before anybody asks, yes, kids, it is a touchscreen because, you know, tablet.
It's got to be a tablet. There you go.
It is. It is what it is. The Miller Electric 10,500 watt power supply unit review. I was laughing because I was like, when did Miller start doing portable? Because I thought it was like a home power supply. And then I realized it's a freaking welder and it's a freaking April Fool's joke.
What? How did you guess such a thing?
Because it's a freaking Miller XMT 300. And I also want to compliment Lee on his excellent taste in welding technology. Lincoln makes some good machines too, but I learned how to TIG weld on a Miller machine, and I actually learned how to MIG weld on a Lincoln machine. So I have a lot of fond love for both of them. But yeah, it's that made me laugh. While we were not able to obtain a review sample of Miller's flagship 10.5 kilowatt unit, we do have an exclusive review of the Miller XMT 300 PC, which can deliver up to 4,500 watts of pure DC power. Talk about having some extra reserve capacity. Wow. It's like
it only weighs 80 pounds.
Well, you know, a lot of copper in that box. A lot of copper in that box. So we got an email from Mike about NAS, which is really appropriate because I got to talk to Alan about NAS boxes earlier this week for Tech Thing, because we did a backup special because Shannon was taken by force to the Bahamas by family. I don't know how that works either. The Bahamas under protest. How does that work? Mike writes, longtime listener to TWiCH, just recently started listening to TWiCH. Thank you, Mike. Really enjoy the show and I've added you guys to my weekly podcast lineup. Thank you, Mike. The wife and I cut the cord about a year ago. I built a simple home theater PC for the living room and using an Intel NUC and XBMC. It's been great. We've always had an external hard drive plugged into our router for backups, TV shows, movies, and other files. But since cutting the cord, the drive is filled up rather quickly. They do that. We've had to buy a larger version twice, leading with the current 3 terabyte drive we're currently using. Now that this drive is almost full, and I'm interested in your opinion on how to upgrade our network storage. Question. Should I stick with the current setup and simply buy another larger external drive for the router, purchase a dedicated NAS box, or build a home server? What are the pros and cons of each option? Is there any use in having a home server nowadays? If so, what kinds of features does it add to my home network? Thank you for your time and keep up the good work, Mike. First of all, Mike, again, welcome. Second, great question. And boy, there are so many ways to skin this particular cat. I think there's still a lot of good reasons to have a home server, whether it's for backups or for sharing media. You know, your home server could be a NAS that you purchase. In fact, somewhere around my feet right now is a quietly humming Synology box, DS1515 Plus. And the nice thing about buying, no,
I looked underneath my feet. I didn't see one here. I was just looking.
It's right over there. I turned the laptop around, but you don't want to see the shorts I'm wearing right now. Yeah. So, you know, because you could build like a dedicated server. A FreeNAS box is particularly excellent. XFS is an amazing file system, but then you have to administer it, right? So if you buy a NAS or a Drobo, you don't have to administer it. Synology's done the, it's fun because Alan has nothing but really nice things to say about Synology. They've done a bunch of really cool stuff to simplify the interface, and there are lots of plugins that make it easier to do lots of interesting things with your home server. You could also try to do a Windows Home Server box, or you can just use an OS 10 or Windows machine to store and share those files, which is one of the things that Alan's been doing with an older PC he's got in his house. He's running StableBit's Drive Pool, which is a really interesting application that essentially, you know, turns a bunch of drives, Alan being Alan, of course. There's like, I think he's got, 19 6 terabyte drives.
Yeah,
Six,
sure.
6, 8, 19. At some point, anybody having more than like 2 or 3 6 terabyte drives just lying about the house is just awesome and slightly frightening. But what it does is it runs in Windows and it pulls those drives into one giant chunk of storage and allows you to say, hey, I want double copies of these files, or I don't want extra copies at all. So instead of having parity recovery or parity data bits or parity data that you can recover a lost drive from in the way that RAID devices do, you basically have all of the files on this drive, and you can say, hey, I want all of the files on that drive and this drive and over here, so I have at least 3 copies of those files. It's not as sophisticated and mathematical, but should the machine fail, you can yank the living drives out, plug them into another, SATA connector on another machine, and grab your files off there, which is pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, that's a big advantage.
Yeah, if you've ever done NAS recovery, you will probably be nodding your head right now and going, yes. Yes, that would be nice. So it's $34.95 for that. The router's not a bad idea. I would probably say it's a better idea, especially if you want to serve multiple devices in the house. It's tempting to get your oldest, least, powerful machine and turn it into a low-grade server. You don't have, FreeNAS is cool, but if you want to do the really cool stuff with FreeNAS, you need to have, a gigabyte of memory per terabyte of storage, roughly, and a fair amount of performance. But there are other options that are less expensive, or just run Windows or OS 10 and something like Drive Pool, and just keep adding more storage as you need it, and then back the whole beast up on or build a second machine or a free NAS box, or buy a NAS and then back up all of your files from that machine to the other machine. I'm a little backup obsessed this week because of backup week on Tech Thing, but I would probably at the very least make sure all of those files were copied onto a second machine somewhere in your house or up on CrashPlan or something. So there are advantages to building a dedicated NAS, but you don't have to, or purchasing a dedicated NAS.
There's something about the ease and simplicity of attaching a USB hard drive to the back of a router.
When it works.
Yeah. And if your wife is more technically proficient than maybe mine is, and drastically changing how they access their data, from the router to a NAS box or a home server is something that you're comfortable with, then you might make that make that switch. But if not, you could go with a RAID 1 external USB 3.0 device that's 4 terabytes or up to 6 terabytes. I'm sure you can get now as well, for simplicity's sake. But yeah,
if it works, don't fix it. Is really good advice from Mr. Ryan Shrout. Yeah, I have you buying new machines and configuring stuff, and Ryan's like, throw a larger drive on there.
If you're asking me, like, what does a home server do for you? Right. I don't know. Like, it seems like any device can do decode at this point, right? So if you're watching videos, do you really need it? You're just really streaming data, and then you can do the decode on really any side of that equation. Wow. But
so a good reason for a home server or a NAS box is if you want to use it to back up files, if you wanted to use it to keep additional copies of files, if you want something that will allow you a vastly greater amount of storage than a single drive will offer, and if you're looking for something that is a little bit more less likely to be savaged by the vagaries of people running up and typing on a keyboard or yanking a plug. Although I guess people could get to your NAS and yank the plug on that. But in theory, a NAS should be more stable than most PCs. It doesn't always work that way. Yeah. But, I don't know. And the prices have come down a lot on NAS boxes. I was also trying to run... I'm not as big a fan of hard drives on routers, mostly because of some early problems I had with them and the throughput on them, most of which have been solved because the routers are much faster. So perhaps it is time for me to rejoin the world of the people plugging hard drives into routers just to retest it. But, once you start getting terabytes of data online, you have almost no interest in the experience. Like, it's working. We're good. Which it's a good reason to just leave your drive, get a bigger drive, and
Agreed.
plug in your router. At Ryan Shrout, at Patrick Norton writes, at Lucid Mike, or tweets more accurately, is there any reason to keep an old video card in a PC once you install a newer or better one? Do you have one monitor? Do you have multiple monitors? Would you like to have multiple monitors? It's always nice to have a spare video card around for diagnostic purposes, for that once or twice a year where I'm like, is it the GPU? Is it the driver? Is it the motherboard? Is it my monitor? Ryan knows this feeling where it's like, I'll just go over there and grab this one from over here and fixed. Okay,
yes.
so that's the problem. Do you ever leave the older GPU? Because at this point, almost every GPU made supports 3 monitors.
Yeah, unless you're doing something really, really specific. You're going to be able to support 3 displays. Even with the older cards, you can be able to support 2 displays. Most modern ones, you can do 4 displays. There's really no need to keep the older graphics card in there. Some people might say, well, you could, if they're both NVIDIA cards, you could use the older card for physics. And yeah, you could probably do that if you want, I guess. It doesn't seem necessary to me. There's not like a huge number of games that use it, that use hardware physics acceleration. And to me, it takes up space in a case. It's using power that is not necessary. It makes things more complicated. It might potentially make the system a little bit less stable because it's handling multiple graphics rendering things. To me, there's not. I think it serves more purpose either to sell it and help offset some of the cost of your new card, or to keep it on hand as that, in case my card dies, I have something where I can get my system up and running and I don't have to wait for a return or an RMA or something like that if the card doesn't have a whole lot of resale value. That would be what I would keep around old hardware for. And that is why when I build a new system for myself, I usually build it completely new parts, and then I keep the old system around for a couple of months to make sure there's no issues with the new one, that everything's stable, that all the data that I really wanted was copied over, and then kind of just have that spare parts section there if you need it. Now, obviously, we have access to a lot more parts than that, but for the normal consumer, you might consider just keeping that as like your beginnings into a world of spare parts that you may need at another time. Just don't become a pack rat like me and save everything all the time.
A pack rat like us. Don't make me get the floppy drives I found that were in the bottom of the box underneath the SS. Yeah. I finally got rid of the giant collection of SCSI cables and adapters.
I threw away an entire garbage bag of SATA cables once.
Hopefully you had them properly disposed of at electronics facilities so that copper could be recovered.
Sure. Yeah, I did all those things.
Recycle your electronics properly. Don't be like Ryan.
I did when I cleaned out my office. I took probably 5 or 6 giant tubs of stuff to a computer recycling place. They're like, "Do you want us to want to wait around and see what they're worth?" And I was like, "Nope, I don't. Just take it all. Just dump it in a giant bin someplace. This is yours now."
It could have been a good night of beer money.
I'm sure it could have. I felt better about myself not taking their money, knowing that had they said, we don't take all that, it just would have been in a dumpster someplace, because we don't have this. We probably don't have the same number and quantity of electronics recycling locations out here.
You can recycle electronics. I can think of at least 4 places in the surrounding. If I drew a circle around Richmond, I think there's at least 4, maybe 6 different places.
Do you have to pay to have a CRT recycled?
For the most part, yes, unless you donate it to Goodwill, or there's a ton actually really regular sort of, I think they're done in some cases as part of fundraisers. In other cases, it's recycling companies that basically put out flyers and like, meet us in this parking lot and we'll recycle your materials. And I always have this profound urge to drive by, because once I saw a pair of speakers, what I was pretty sure was about a $3,000 pair of speakers that somebody had brought to them to recycle. And it was just like, no, not the Clipshorns. Well, every so often, I've walked in and found a really nice piece of consumer electronics at the Goodwill.
Right.
And I just love paying $20 for something that would have cost me $1,000 otherwise, because I'm cheap.
Everybody can appreciate that.
And if not, that's okay, because you're driving the economy and I'm recycling, reducing, and reusing. Oh my goodness. Yeah. With that bright and cheerful note, I'm going to think a lot about upgrading the mSATA drive in this laptop this week. But first, I'll get my testing on with the Core M processor. I'm really liking just exactly how silent this laptop is.
A fanless design can be silent.
You know, call me old-fashioned, call me crazy, but not hearing the fan is just awesome.
The Yoga 3 Pro that also uses a Core M processor, I think it might be a little bit higher frequency than that one does have a fan, so you can definitely hear that. So there's trade-off there, right? I'll be curious to see what the battery life is on that device, and then kind of if you feel any difference in performance, like just your typical web browsing. You're probably like most of us, heavy web browsing usage, right? And we're not talking about one or two tabs open all the time.
I never have more than 100 tabs open at once.
That's good. That's good. If you go over 100, it becomes a bottleneck for many things. But yeah, yes, I think we're getting in one of those TWiCHs as well. So I'll be curious to see kind of what our notes compared and look like.
The finish is really clean. I should probably break down and learn the secret sauce of Hellfire battery testing that is used at PC Per. You guys are
pretty
cruel.
simple. Yeah. We have a web address you can go to and you run a test and it gives you a result. You just have to. The problem with battery testing is it takes a long time. So you got to run it a couple times. You got to drain it and then charge it and then drain it and then charge it and then drain it and then charge it. And then if you're trying to measure the charge rates, you got to watch it and run another application for that. And it's all kinds of fun.
I didn't realize the battery test was up online.
Well, it's not public, but I can give it to you. I will share it with you.
I'm searching and I'm like, really?
No.
Oh,
yes.
my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm going to derp myself into the distance. I mentioned the backup show on Tech Thing this week. Michael Hand and I launched Possibly Unsafe. We built a Raspberry Pi streaming box last week, and this week we made hot sauce, sriracha-style hot sauce with habaneros, and I actually managed to make my face stop working temporarily. You can check that out at possiblyunsafe.com, pcper.com, along with a giant pile of SSD glory. I bet has more stories coming up this week or next week.
Yeah, we certainly do. I'm trying to think. We got Lenovo X1 Carbon in, which is their new Broadwell variant of that, and then the T450S, which is kind of like the more kind of businessy, longer battery life. Like I think it has like if you use its biggest battery combination, it's like 79 or 78 watt hour battery. No, 90 something watt hour battery total using Broadwell. So that gets pretty substantially improved battery life over previous generations. We got our Titan X SLI testing to finally get to, and finally going to write up the MSI GS30, which is the Ultrabook with the dock with the external graphics combination, and see if that's kind of worth the money that they are asking for it.
All I can think right now is, you can't boot off of the NVMe with the Intel SSD 750 because it's like, okay, great.
You can.
Titan X. I thought it said specifically in the article that you couldn't boot it if it was. No,
you could definitely boot off of you couldn't boot off of the P3700, the enterprise one.
Got it.
You can boot off this, but it does require you to have specific motherboards like that have implemented support for it. It's, X99 and Z97 boards today, and then check to make sure that they've added NVMe. But you can. Yeah.
I just want to see you build like a 64 gigabyte Intel SSD 750 RAID configured Titan X SLI machine connected to a 4K monitor just to run some encoding tests and a little bit of like Adobe Premiere.
Yeah.
I'm telling you.
Just use this, 2 Titan X's. Yeah, I get that. Sure.
I mean, literally, it's probably all within 4 or 5 footsteps of where you're sitting right now.
It is,
and if I sound jealous, it's because I am. And ladies and gentlemen, you should be jealous too. Ryan is living the life, but you're not benchmarking, and he is. So maybe you're living the life because I've run benchmarks and they hurt. And I'll be running benchmarks again this week, he said as he looked at the Chi. Oh my goodness. That's it for this episode of This Week in Computer Hardware. I'm Patrick Norton.
I'm Ryan Shrout.
We'll see you next week on TWiCH.